Hi, I'm Leah Wheatholter, owner of Workman Forensics, and this is the Investigation Game Podcast. Welcome to the Investigation Game Podcast. Today I am joined by Van. Van is a local business owner, and a few years ago, he became aware of allegations that employees were stealing from his business. So I asked him if he would be willing to share about his experience today with our listeners. And just so our listeners know, we will be working together, both Van and I, to share this story without identifying anyone specifically. So thanks for being here, Van.
Thanks for having me.
So to provide just a little background context, what type of business do you own?
It's a community service provider agency similar to a home health agency.
Okay. And what was your involvement? When did you start this business? And then what was your involvement up to the point that you found out you might have a problem?
Well, I started the business in 2000.
Okay.
And the initial plan was that I was going to run it, but then some other business opportunities came up. It accelerated my plan in that who I was going to hire to do what. Mm-hmm. So I hired someone that I had an extensive history with to run it. Mm-hmm. I knew this person had the programmatic knowledge, probably weak on the business side, but I could hold her hand and walk her through all of that. So that allowed me to not be a financial burden on the upstart, but still remain involved. So long answer to your question, I was kind of an absentee owner. I was an absentee owner with the business because she got in and we set it up. Things started clicking. You
hired essentially a CEO.
Correct.
And then what other types of individuals were there to run kind of the business side?
Well,
like, did she run everything or did she have...
Initially.
Okay.
And then, as we grew, we obviously started adding more people. A year after we started, we hired a bookkeeper who had a lot of experience in the industry. So it was a natural fit. So it wasn't a big learning curve for anybody.
Yeah.
CEO was hired initially and then bookkeeper about a year later. And then, of course, we had a lot of programmatic staff that didn't really have a lot to do with the running of the business, but more on the program side.
Sure, providing those services to your clients.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Whenever you set up your business, one of the things I noticed whenever we were introduced was that you did have several different controls in place that should have helped it make it easier to be an absentee owner, like you said. So what were some of those controls that you did set up?
Well, the bookkeeper was who handled all of the accounting. The CEO was to review all accounts receivable, accounts payable. Every check required 2 signatures. Mm-hmm. We outsourced a CPA, hired a CPA to come in and balance the bank statements and everything. Mm-hmm. Everything was supposed to have backup invoices, any bills that were paid. You had to have an invoice to back it up and everything. So
yeah. And then every year you were audited right?
Yeah, we had a financial audit every year. In addition to that, we had a program audit every year. There was some overlap. The program auditors, while they weren't CPAs coming in, they did look at some of the financial information, but it wasn't a full-blown financial audit like what you think of as a financial audit. So.
Yeah, and all of these things that you've mentioned, just having that second person involved in this process and splitting up these responsibilities, I mean, that's what I would recommend if I went into a business.
Yeah, I thought I had all my bases covered.
So you started in 2000?
2000.
And then about how long had your business been running when you were told about some allegations of financial misconduct?
16 years.
Yeah, gosh, wow.
16 years. I thought everything was running smoothly.
And nothing raised a red flag that...
No. As a matter of fact, we mentioned the 2 types of audits that we had. There was never any issue on any of the financial audits. Nothing. Program audits that we got, they were good. I mean, we never got a bad mark you get gigged for little things, but nothing that really amounted to much.
Right.
So you just fix it and you go on.
Right.
So throughout the 16 years, everybody was giving us gold stars.
Right. So, and the financials were what you expected as well.
Yes.
That when you were given the financials, it was what you expected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So then let's talk about, how did you find out that you had a problem? What happened?
Well, out of the blue, I had an administrative employee call me and ask to meet with me because she had some concerns. I met with this individual, and she shared some information with me that obviously concerned me.
Yeah.
I asked her to bring me some proof of what she was telling me, and she did. So after looking at that, I was almost in panic mode.
Mm.
Yeah.
What did she say was going on?
Well, initially she said that there was some payroll being padded, and that there were some checks that were being written for the wrong things.
Okay.
So, but the primary thing was the padded payroll.
Yeah.
She had another employee just happened to mention to her that, kind of like a confession, that she had an arrangement with the CEO. The CEO would pad her paycheck, her hours, in return for this individual basically going out cashing her check and coming back and giving the CEO cash, half of those padded hours. So that's what got this whistleblower staff to call me and say, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
After that staff had confessed to her, what she did, the whistleblower staff, started doing some snooping.
Okay.
And she went into the CEO's office and got on her computer that she, I guess, just left up and running.
I was about to say, okay, that's real secure.
Yeah. Because to the best of my recollection, it didn't require a password to get in.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So anyway, she goes in and she basically starts snooping on her computer and looking in the financials. And the thing that really raised an alarm to her was in the accounting software, she found checks that were supposedly written to her that she claims she never received.
Oh, to the whistleblower's name.
Yes.
It said it was paid to whistleblower, but
Right.
whistleblower never received them. Okay.
Right. Then she started running reports. And that actually, whenever she met with me, that is one of the reports that she brought to me, was a list of checks that were written out to her and this other staff that had confessed to her that, according to the accounting system, says these checks were written to them, but according to them, they never received the checks.
Oh, gosh.
There were some other reports that she showed me that obviously raised a red flag, but that's what started the whole thing.
Yeah. So then let's just kind of circle back around to that payroll issue too, just to make sure that's explained for our listeners. So the CEO would tell this employee, I've put an extra $1,000 on your check. When that check clears or when you cash it or whatever, I want you to bring me back $500.
Correct.
That's how that would work.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything looked legit.
Right.
Unless you go and actually compare their paycheck to their timesheet.
Right. At the beginning, when she told you this, like, what was your first reaction?
Well, my emotions, the entire gamut, as you can imagine. There was anger, disbelief, fear, because I'm thinking, how much is going out? Of course, as a business owner, I'm thinking, how is this going to affect my business?
Right.
A lot of anger.
So what did you do first, just in response to this? I mean, you find out about this, it is infuriating, but then you got to do something about it. So what was that next step for you?
I believe I asked for a few more documents from the whistleblower staff and this other staff that confessed, which they brought me what they could generate or find. Then I started putting the ball in motion of obviously I have to get the CEO out of there. But I set up a meeting with the CEO and the bookkeeper, which we haven't. I don't know that we've discussed the bookkeeper.
We haven't gotten into that one yet.
Yeah. But one of the things that obviously the bookkeeper had to be involved if there were fraudulent checks being written.
Right.
Because as I stated, there requires 2 checks and everything's supposed to have backup for. So the bookkeeper had to be involved at some point. But on the payroll reports that she brought me, there were some improprieties there too. For example, the bookkeeper's husband was on the payroll, but he never worked for us.
Right.
needless to say, I set the ball in motion, set up a meeting, came to the office under the guise of meeting with them about something, and terminated their employment.
Mm-hmm.
And then contacted the police
Mm-hmm.
and contacted an attorney
Yep.
who contacted you.
That's right. That's a pretty normal path
Yes,
for people to find me.
Yeah.
I remember throughout all of this, we kind of started with looking at the payroll issue and the ghost employee, like you were talking about, the bookkeeper's spouse being on the payroll. Then also looking at those checks that were allegedly paid to the employee, but the employee never received them. And so just looking at what that looked like. And if I remember correctly, just from a data perspective on the check issue with those checks to the whistleblower employee, the checks would be, this is off the top of my head, I haven't read your report in a long time, but let's just say that a check was actually written to CEO or bookkeeper, and then the check would be printed and taken to the bank, but then in the system in QuickBooks they would go back and code it under whistleblower employee's name. And so that's how that worked. So for us to see how much was this damage to your business, for us, we went, and you were using QuickBooks, and so we went back in QuickBooks and looked at the audit trail to see how many checks had been changed like that, and then went and verified that those checks had actually, who did those checks actually get paid to? But that was part of that concealment, and why your external CPA reconciling wouldn't have noticed unless they were actually checking the payees on the bank statement and comparing that to what was in QuickBooks.
Correct.
So that's kind of how that uncovered padded payroll, ghost employee, and then just checks written to whomever and then disguised as something else.
Right.
Were there any other schemes that were discovered along the way?
Yeah. I mean, there were items purchased supposedly it looked like a legitimate business expense, but, as we started looking around, they were nowhere to be found.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the paper trail, the invoices and stuff, you would see that, like, for example, that these things were delivered to somebody's personal address
Mm-hmm.
or another business.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Because there were some side businesses involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That your business was funding. And I also remember, too, there were a lot of missing supporting documents, too. Like, you did have good systems in place that required supporting documentation. And so you would have supporting documentation for all of it except these additional payments or except fraudulent reimbursements.
Right. As I mentioned earlier, everything was supposed to have backup. And there was a lot of that missing. For example, a lot of documentation that would be missing, which we couldn't locate.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't locate what was purchased.
Right.
So obviously those things went somewhere to
Right.
somebody else.
Right. And your business paid for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know that would have ever been caught unless, like you said, somebody was there. And whenever they're doing the reconciliation of the bank statements, they look at the actual check and they see, well, this says it went to Best Buy,
Mm-hmm.
but it was actually written to Joe Blow over here, or the check that was cashed actually went to Joe Blow.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to look for an invoice, the backup for that, it's not there.
Right. Yeah. There was a lot of that.
A lot.
Another interesting kind of scheme that was going on too was that a bunch of the people who were being paid this padded payroll, they were also getting paid extra reimbursements and they were getting paid extra petty cash. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That just came to my mind too. That
Yes.
they were only supposed to be paid expense reimbursements and petty cash a couple times a month, but they were getting
Right.
checks
They get
every
petty
week,
cash every week.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And again, on paper, auditors would look at that. Well, that's legitimate.
mm-hmm. Well, and the dollar amount was
Right.
so small too for the
Right.
revenue. So
Right. But those little things add up.
they do.
And they
Yes.
add up quick. Yes.
Another one too is that diverting some of your AR to a dummy business account.
Yes. Unbeknownst to me, the CEO and the bookkeeper conspired to set up a bank account at a different institution under a very similar name to my business.
Mm-hmm.
And the banking institution obviously didn't do their due diligence,
Mm-hmm.
set it up. And the name was so similar to my business name that whenever they brought in a check to deposit, it was just business as usual for them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that part of the loss was just pretty significant. I mean, just taking that out.
And that was a bold move on their part.
That
It was a really stupid move, but it was a bold move on their part.
And that wouldn't have shown up either because they were deleting the invoices, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't showing that the client owed anything or that whoever the customer was owed anything. They were deleting the invoice altogether.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have any outstanding receivables, you wouldn't even know that there were things past due or that you never received the money.
Exactly.
Right. Because it was deleted.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we found that, just so our listeners know, was by once again looking at the audit trail in QuickBooks, look at everything that's deleted. And why do we have all these invoices deleted?
Yes.
That's how we went to go quantify the loss. Do you remember how you discovered that happened?
I don't recall.
I don't remember either.
I do recall. How did I learn of the other bank account?
Yes.
Because when I terminated them, the day that happened, they wanted to go back into the office and get to their things, and I told them they couldn't. And it just so happened they had the checkbook for the checking account for the fraudulent account. That's the only way I caught that.
Wow.
And if my memory serves me correctly, I brought that to you or informed you about that. And that's when we started looking for that scheme.
So then we go into the audit trail. Okay, well, how did you not know you didn't collect all this? And then here's all these deleted invoices. And so, gosh, I'm just checking my list to make sure we covered all of them. I mean, there's just so many. So whenever you first heard about this problem from the whistleblower, how many people did you originally think were involved?
Well, originally, when I first met with the whistleblower staff, I thought it was a couple of people. Mm-hmm.
And then how many were there in the end that you know of for sure? I mean, there could have been more, but... That
we can prove without a doubt, there was 10 people.
10.
Yeah.
10
Basically, almost all of my administrative staff were involved to one degree or another in one scheme or another. There were several schemes going on, all independent of one another. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a big shock. I initially thought one or two people were getting their payroll padded, and they're working with the CEO and the bookkeeper to, make some fraudulent purchases. And never did I expect that everybody would be involved in it.
Just the ability to run that many schemes from how do you keep that many people to keep their mouths shut for that long? But also, we've talked about this before, that you did have these controls in place, but once everybody is part of a scheme, or lots of schemes in this case, or however they were all connected and kind of had dirt on the other person, then that, in our fraud investigation world, we say that collusion always breaks your controls. And so this was the perfect storm of collusion. You had these controls in place. You were being diligent as a business owner to set this up. But then if those people are all conspiring to work together, it's going to break your controls.
Right. And that, I don't remember who it was that kept telling me that, whenever I was living this nightmare, you don't beat yourself up too bad, because if two people in the right position are going to conspire against you, they're going to be successful at least for a little while.
Right.
Especially two key people like what I had, CEO and the bookkeeper. They had control of all of the financial stuff.
They were the top two.
Yes, they were two of the controls I had in place. Right. They were supposed to check one another.
Right.
And I would periodically meet with them individually to talk about the other one. To say, is anything going on, fishy? Has she made any questionable purchases or anything like that, and I would ask her the same of him. But when they're in it together,
right.
it's tough. It's tough to catch.
Right. Well, we're going to take a really quick break, and we'll get back to the story.
If you're a professional with continuing education requirements, then you've sat through your fair share of required training hours. Let's just say you probably didn't love it. And every year, the requirement hours sneak up on you at the worst time. That's why we've created the Investigation Game, an interactive CPE training experience that qualifies for 2 hours of ethics continuing education. The investigation game, The Case of the Man Cave, gives players the opportunity to walk through an investigation and solve a case based on actual events. Think of it as your favorite detective game, but with an opportunity to learn while you play. Players are given case details, decision-making steps, and additional case information to then quantify the embezzlement loss, identify schemes used, and uncover assets purchased with stolen funds. Gameplay wraps up with a presentation providing the case solution and awards the winning teams. This valuable event makes earning continuing education hours fun by combining a real-life case study with an interactive team-building game that we think you're going to love. To learn more or to register, visit investigationgame.com.
Welcome back to my interview with Van. So Van, over how many years do you think these schemes were occurring?
We don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What we do know is that it went back at least 6 years. Once we got to a dollar amount, it became futile to research further.
Right.
And plus, after that long, a lot of the records, paper records, backup stuff is missing. They'd already been purged and things like that. So we stopped looking after 6 years. So we know it went on that long.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect it went on longer than that.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, over those 6 years, I think all of these schemes we've talked about were going on for those 6 years. So you may have just had a couple of the schemes prior to that. Surely it didn't all just, they had a team meeting and said, all right, this is what we're going to do, and have these 6 to 8 schemes or however many we've got.
It was like a snowball going down the hill,
Yeah.
Each year that snowball just kept getting bigger, bigger.
Yes.
Maybe they brought in somebody else, but yeah, they were all going 6 years before I caught it, and they just picked up steam.
Right. And the fact that there weren't financial red flags for you, that everything appeared to be running the same way until you got in and actually started looking at things. Profit can only fund embezzlement for so long. You're going to run out of profit or the extra cash flow. And so you were saying earlier before the interview that when you got in, you discovered how they were kind of funding some of this.
Right. That's a common question. Whenever somebody learns about my experience, that's one of the first questions they ask was, how did you not know?
Right.
How
did you not feel it?
If they're taking that kind of money, surely you would have noticed it, And if I were in their shoes, on the outside looking in, I would have said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the profit margin, there was a little fluctuation over the years,
mm-hmm.
but it was relatively the same as you would expect. You had some up years and some down years, but there weren't huge fluctuations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was never a red flag there. Compile that with the fact that we're getting clean financial audits, we're getting clean program audits. The outside CPA says everything looks good to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there were just no obvious red flags to anybody.
But they had to be finding this money somewhere.
Yes.
And the way they were doing that.
Yes. And once I got in there and we started digging, one of the ways that they were able to do that was, they were pushing bills out to be paid, to almost to where they were going to be sent to collections.
And then that's when they would pay them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because if it had gone to collections, it would have triggered a red flag. So.
Right.
More than likely. I mean, they could hide that too, I guess. But
yeah, they could have.
But eventually, you're going to find out.
If they can hide a bank account, I mean, they could have hid that. So, right.
Yeah. So,
and to my knowledge, it never happened. But that's not to say that it didn't.
That's true. Yeah, I've had that before. Whenever people are embezzling, they always run out of money, so they have to start pulling from some other source, right? And so this one particular person, when she ran out of the extra cash and the owner says, oh, I'm not doing very well, just don't pay me payroll. Well, she just took his payroll too. That funded the embezzlement. At a certain point, okay, now the owner's not getting paid. There's no extra money. She's stolen all the profit. Where'd she go? The payroll trust accounts, and pulling that out and not paying payroll taxes. So then that creates a whole nother headache for the owner whenever this was discovered. But she was getting the notices because she was the bookkeeper. So she was getting the notices for the payroll.
Yeah.
And she was hiding those. So it just perpetuated. But
that's one advantage that I had. Thank God that we always had our taxes paid because we outsourced our payroll.
Yes.
So I didn't have to deal with that headache, and then I had an outside CPA doing the taxes.
Yeah,
and
so
everything.
they couldn't steal that part of it.
Yeah, I shudder to think what it would have been like
Oh,
had I had that in-house.
yeah. The one area that is just one of the toughest for owners is they've just lost all this money, and now there are all these penalties, and the responsibility still falls back on the owner for all those payroll taxes.
Right.
And yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so our listeners at this point are probably wanting to know, what was the total calculated?
The calculated total over the 6-year span was approximately 1.2 million.
Gosh.
That was the calculated total. That's the actual dollars and cents that we can add up. There's a trail for that now. The real total was significantly more than that whenever you consider the damage to my reputation, the business's reputation. I had to pay back some clients that had some money taken from them.
Yeah.
All of that's not in the calculated total.
Right. And then not to mention legal fees.
Oh, yeah. Legal fees, investigative
fees.
Banking fees for getting a lot of this history that they had. I don't know if they destroyed it or they lost it or what, but you got to go back for 6 years. You call the bank and say, I need bank statements from 6 years ago. They want to charge you for that.
Right.
So, but yeah, the expense of investigating this stuff, whether it's the attorney or
me,
the forensic accountant,
yep,
somebody, that was not.
And even your time, because we were spending a lot of time.
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of data to go through, but there was a ton of time on your part and your wife's part of pulling documents and just uncovering more things.
Yeah. There was some long days.
Yeah.
And if you can just imagine, put yourself in my frame of mind, you just caught people stealing all this money from you. The more you dig, the more you find, and it just wears on you. Yep. It really wears on you. Obviously, you can't sleep, you can't eat. It takes a toll on you, more than a financial toll.
Sure. And these are people that you thought you had a great relationship with, that you trusted. Yeah. And the
CEO, I would have considered her an extended member of the family.
Right.
I had that strong of a trust factor with her.
Right.
Obviously, it was misplaced. But to add insult to injury, many of the individuals involved in the embezzlement of my business continue to work in this industry. Mm-hmm. With their continued employment in the industry, they have continued their pillaging of my business by stealing clientele. Despite the fact that they got caught, as a business owner, your hands are kind of tied as to whenever you're investigating things as to what you can say.
Right.
Your attorney tells you, keep your mouth shut.
Right.
But during that time, these perpetrators are out there spinning these tales and dragging your name and your business's name through the mud to make themselves look better. Mm-hmm. And whenever they go to a client and they tell them that I just have this vendetta against them, and that the client sometimes believes them. Mm-hmm. Consequently, they entice that client to move with them to one of my competitors.
Right.
And they use that client as a bargaining chip in their new place of employment. Mm-hmm. But there's not a whole lot that I can say other than just, issue a warning to people, I don't know that I would trust that person. But anyway, long story short, even after they were caught, some of them continued to steal from the business. Mm-hmm. And actually, here we're, 4 years later, and it's still happening, not as frequently, but it still happens to a certain degree.
Yeah, gosh. Throughout the investigation, were there some things that surprised you as you went through this process? You run a business and you know your business. And then all of a sudden you are now in the legal world, in the investigation world. So I'm curious what someone on the outside of my industry thought were kind of surprising things.
Well, this was my first foray into the legal world.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an eye opener.
Yeah.
It was really
it's a crazy world, right?
It is.
Operates by its own rules.
It is. And I don't like those rules.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
I'll be honest with you, I don't. But yeah, so surprising, some of the things that surprised me is one, the creativity of the criminal mind. And in my situation, the other thing is the unwillingness of people to talk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else surprising or even frustrating that you would add onto that?
Well, I was surprised at how thorough a forensic audit can be.
Oh gosh.
I was you would call me with something whenever I was living this nightmare, and you would ask me questions about something. Obviously, you call me and ask me questions about something that spurs my curiosity.
Then you have to go dig for more.
Yeah, it was like, what? There's another embezzlement scheme going that we haven't we just now found, and those are the things that it surprised me, is how thorough a forensic audit can be. Mm-hmm. Because again, I'm at this point, I was thinking, how can my annual financial audit not catch this?
Right.
Well, there's a big difference between a financial audit and a forensic audit.
There is.
And that was surprising to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's a very common misconception, because I think that a financial audit to a business owner makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Somebody else who's an expert in financials is looking at my financials, but there's only so much that they're going to look at every year. And a lot of these things we talked about would have fallen under the materiality threshold. But like you said, added up, 1.2 million over 6 years, this many people working together. Yeah. I mean, it just adds up.
Yeah, I can remember whenever you seen your report on the analysis that you did of the checks that were changed in QuickBooks. Mm-hmm. The check that got cashed, how it differed from the check register. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at that, just almost literally being sick. Mm-hmm. Going, how did they figure that out?
Right.
Right. So it goes back to the first surprise. I thought the creativity of the criminal mind is surprising.
Yeah.
To me. The number one thing that was frustrating is the so-called justice system. Is for those that are listening and have never actually been involved in something like this, it is incredibly frustrating and unsatisfying. I mean, the response that you get from law enforcement, for my case, was literally, "Don't call us, we'll call you."
Yeah.
That was literally what I was told.
I also think, too, in your case, because there was so much collusion, the dollar amount is 1.2 million, but the dollar amount per person is so small.
Adds a problem.
And so your case is just it. I don't mean this offensively to any investigator by any means, but the intricacies of the case and the time that would be taken to prosecute it on a local level, it's just too much because of their volume and everything that they have to do every day. Right. But then on the federal level, it's too small per person. And so it doesn't necessarily meet some of those thresholds. I found that frustrating on your case as well. And just trying to think, how can we, but we can't make something up, obviously. Right. But it is very frustrating. And in your case, you did have some insurance, not close to this. Yeah. What were some of the methods you used to help recover your loss? And more specifically, like, you can file a complaint with law enforcement, civil lawsuit, insurance, those types of things. I think we did all of those things on your case, whether or not they panned out. But
right. Yeah, I think we explored every avenue to help recover the loss, but it's never, and in my case, it was never enough.
Come close,
it was never, obviously, insurance, they're not really eager to part with their money either. They're going to find fault with you, right. And you're already down. And then, the insurance agency comes in and tells you, well, you should have been doing this or you should have been doing that, and it's just, it's they literally kick you when you're down.
Right.
So yeah, that was incredibly frustrating dealing not only with them. Then you talk about the banks. They're certainly not eager to admit fault on their part either.
Right.
Everybody wanted to blame me.
I know.
Yeah. So,
and I think we talked about it then, and I mean, I'm going to say it again for our listeners too, but that is so common.
Yeah.
And it's just, well, was the business owner not paying attention? Was the business owner not doing this? Was the business owner not doing this? And sitting as the business owner myself in my own business, I think, when would I have done all of these things? Like anytime there's a mistake, well, I mean, you should have saw that coming. Did you not see that coming, Leah? Like,
right.
No, because at some level we have to trust people. We cannot operate in this world if at some level we can't trust people.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, in the beginning, you talk about what we did to recover the loss. I think that was the question.
Mm-hmm.
I remember meeting the initial meeting with the attorney, and I think you were in that meeting, but I remember having to think about, again, in my naivety, I'm thinking you turn this over to law enforcement and, they give it to a detective, and that detective goes out and beats the bushes and solves the crime.
Right.
And it was tough to hear that they're not going to do that.
That is not how that works.
Yeah. Mm-mm. They're not going to do that. They don't have the time, the resources,
no,
even the expertise
mm-hmm.
to do an in-depth investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember having to think, okay, I'm going to have to fund this investigation myself.
Yeah.
If I want it solved. Either that or just write it off and walk away.
Right.
I was too angry to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose to basically pay for the investigation.
Okay. Now we're 4 years past or almost 4 years from when you discovered this.
Mm-hmm.
What does your business look like now that these people aren't there anymore?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, many of the actors involved in my case are still in the industry. Mm-hmm. And they have continued to take from the business. Now that's slowed down considerably. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, we've weathered the storm. And I think we're stronger today as a result of this, the changes that we've implemented. Mm-hmm. I think we're stronger not only programmatically, but financially. I know the checks and balances that we have in place are much more strict, probably more strict than anybody else in my industry. Mm. I have a lot of eyeballs looking at things, not just mine. I have involved some of the upper echelon of the management team that review a lot of stuff. Every check that goes out that's a business expense. Well, every check that goes out is a business expense. So there's a number of us that are reviewing all of that, reviewing all of the deposits, scrutinizing the invoices. We've probably gone overboard on the checks and balances, but after you've been through what I've been through, it's I want to say it's natural, but I don't know if it is or not. I've never been through it before.
Well, yeah. Based on my experience, I think so.
Yeah.
So double down and make sure that it's not going to happen again.
We're doing all right. We're not as big as we were as a result of losing some clients, but we're doing well.
Good. Kind of finally, just to wrap all of this up, what would you or do you recommend to business owners to help them prevent embezzlement in their business?
Stay engaged. Trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unless you're going to review every check that goes out like I do now, you're going to have to at least do random checks, of things. And you may not catch anything then, but just stay engaged. Very engaged.
And I think that when I like that idea to stay engaged, because if I'm engaged in my business, I can kind of get that like gut check every now and then, like something's not quite right. Yeah. But if I notice that every time that I kind of step away from an area and I'm not engaged, then I kind of lose that feeling and then I don't know to go check on it.
Yeah.
And so,
for me, I get paranoid now about what's going on, so then I'm sure my staff get frustrated because, whenever I get those paranoid feelings, I They get a lot of questions and a lot of requests for documents, but that it helps me sleep at night.
Van, thank you so much for sharing your story today and to an extent kind of reliving it. I didn't think about that when I asked you to do this, but I know that our listeners, just from an investigative standpoint, I think as an investigator, I forget what it's like to be in your shoes. And then also just for people who maybe own a business listening to the podcast and they go, oh, I'm identifying with a few of these things. And just so that they can go check, because to identify it, I mean, we talked about this before we started recording. What would have happened if another year had gone on? What other areas would they have started dipping into and falsifying and creating really big headaches for you as the business owner? Even though this was a big enough headache, but I mean, being able to catch that when you did, even though it was a long time, but to be able to catch it and stop it, get it removed, and move forward.
Yeah, it could have been, as bad as it was, it could have been a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been a lot worse. And I hope me telling my story, I hope it helps somebody out there.
I'm sure it will. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The Investigation Game podcast is a production of Workman Forensics. For more information about any of the topics that we talk about on the podcast, please visit workmanforensics.com. And to register for our Be a Data Sleuth seminars, visit beadatasleuth.com. You can also connect with us on any of the social media platforms by searching Workman Forensics. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for the podcast, please feel free to email us at podcast@workmanforensics.com. Thanks for listening.